If you've been listening to the show for a long time, you know that I had a breakthrough opportunity with author marketing mastery through optimization, known as AMO, founded by Steve Piper. You'll find links in this show notes, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening through another device on Spotify, Substack, preferably Apple Podcasts, Overcast, welcome. Wherever you're catching this podcast, you'll find a link in the show notes to Steve Piper's AMO pitch, why he created the program, what it does. But what it did for me was it enabled me, a person who only had 3 books, all very recently published, to gain an email list of 1,000 people, to sell over $5,000 of books in the past 6 months at a cost of just about $5,000. I am about to pass the fully profitable point, but for a long time I was on the other side of that. And if that sounds interesting to you, there's some things you have to do and some things you have to know. First, you need to either be with a small publisher who's willing to play ball with you, and a lot of small presses are not. A lot of independent presses are not willing to do something different or give an author a little bit more control. That's a bummer. I believe we're going to see that change. I believe in my heart the small presses are going to start to see what indie authors are doing and to use that method for themselves to be successful. But AMO, if you are with an indie press that's willing to play ball, or you're self-published, you sell direct to readers. You don't let Amazon take a cut. You don't let a publisher take a cut, and you spend up front to edit the book to professional standards, to get a cover professionally designed, to do formatting. You have to have some kind of formatting tool. All of that stuff, you need to be in that place before AMO is good for you. But if you're spending up front and you understand the expenses of business, AMO will give you the ability to reach your target audience. And I think more than anything, that is what's really unique and really special about the program. Like I said, I've spent just about $5,000 all in at this point over, I started in February, it's July now, so just about 6 months. And I have made just a little over $5,000 total. So that is my all-in expenses. The only thing I'm not counting, and it's almost moot because I haven't figured out how to sell audiobooks like I thought I would, is the narration for the audiobooks. That in and of itself is more than everything I've spent for advertising with AMO. Eventually, I'm going to figure out audiobooks. If you're listening, watching, and you have a really good tip on how to sell more audiobooks, I would love to hear it, because I know that it's an untapped frontier and I'm just doing something a little bit wrong. Okay, I'm going to continue to experiment with the best way to make this podcast, and I committed to myself that all of this will go onto YouTube as I learn the best way to edit video, so that I can have a wider audience in more places, as well as when I get good at this, I can repurpose some of the content for shorts on social media, mix it up a little bit. I've talked about this a lot recently, but I'm recognizing the limitations of being one person in my own business, and there is a possibility that at some point I would hire somebody. I looked into doing that early on in the process. I recognized that there were some flaws in the way I was going about things, and until I have a real clear, consistent product that people are buying somewhat predictably, I can't hire somebody, and so I need to be that much more efficient. Apologies if you hear the rain in the background. That's just living in an old house with really thin windows on the top floor in a kind of turret, little pop-out office. One of the things that was clear to me this morning as I was putting together and prepping for the podcast was that life is trial and error, but it's also trial and success. The thing is, if it was only trial and error, which is what we focus on, then we would never get to a point where we stopped trialing and started implementing. And today, I had a trial and success. And so it's going to lead me to be able to do things a little bit better. And in the meantime, I'm trial and erroring something new. The new thing I'm trialing and erroring probably is this current setup. I have a tripod. I got it for Christmas last year. Thank you, Holly. She's my sister. I don't talk a lot about her on the podcast, but it was a Christmas gift from her. I'm not using the little ring light thing because it just makes a strange glow in my glasses. I'd love to hear from people if there's a way around that, or if you just have to go blind. I mean, like literally blind, because I can't see anything right now. But so that's the new trial and error. I don't know how the audio quality will be, but I know last week when I did this through Zoom, even though I was in my own meeting room on my own Wi-Fi, it was really not the best quality of audio. When I was editing, I could hear that it was cutting off little portions of my words, and I didn't want that. So what does this all have to do with libraries? We will get there. I trialed and succeeded finally in figuring out that there's a really simple way that I can cut video inside of Zoom. And so now I can upload this into Zoom, I can cut all of the audio and video together, and then I can just drag the finished file into my audio editor, have a quick listen through to making sure it's okay, and I don't have to double my work, which has been one of the huge barriers, in my opinion, to trying to do both audio and video. You spend double the amount of time if you have to listen to it twice and edit everything, and it just seems really absurd to double the work. So I'm glad that I learned a new tool in YouTube that I can make the cuts that I want, and I can do all of my editing video first and then just drop the audio file, make sure that everything comes across clear, and we're good to go. A lot of that will depend on how well the microphone is picking me up right now. And I say all of this to you because I think that it's important, if you're on this journey with me, to know that I'm giving you all the information I know to give you, but there are some things that I am unconsciously competent at this point that I don't think to tell you because I've done them so much. I got past the trial and error process into trialed, succeeded, and implemented. So there are some things that I've implemented that I don't even know I'm necessarily doing. Which, while we're talking about that, the primary place that you find this podcast is through Substack. Substack hosts my podcast, and they are unique to all other podcast platforms. You might be listening to me on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Overcast. Welcome. If you're listening to me on Overcast, I would love to know that you found the show there because I'm spending money to advertise specifically on Overcast. Really like their program. But yeah, I would love to hear from you, and Substack uniquely allows that to happen. So if you navigate to the link in my show notes, I will always have a link that points back to Substack, no matter where you're listening. If you're listening on Apple, you just expand the show notes. There will be links to everything I talk about that's of any importance, as long as I'm not so busy that I forget to link to things. I have heard before that people said I would put a link in the show notes that isn't there. Hey, I'll put it up if you tell me that you were looking for it and didn't find it. Responsibility is on me, but I would really encourage you, join me over on Substack for a fuller conversation. I have people who are regularly commenting, and they're bringing a ton of value and their learned experience. And if you want to sell a lot of books and be very successful, don't count on me to be the only person who's giving you this information, because some people will share really valuable stuff through the Substack community. And I imagine in a couple of months, if all of us decide to come together, we can build something that's far more interactive than your typical podcast, far more interactive than your typical group, because we all can have a conversation about the same thing and work together. Shoot, I may build friendships here and have already built friendships through Twitter and the podcast and different areas where I have people who are requesting my books in libraries that I met on Twitter, that I met through Substack. And if you are a person right now who's listening to this podcast and you want to do something concrete that won't cost you anything, go in and request from your librarian that they stock my book. If you have Libby or Hoopla, go into the app. You can find my book. It's there. Request it, that your library purchases it. When patrons request, books get bought. And when books get bought, the author makes money. So it's a really cool way for you to do something free and spread your books out there. By the same token, if you want me to request your book here in Omaha, I get 6 a month for free. I can just reach out to them 6 times a month and say, will you buy this book? And more often than not, active patrons get their requests purchased. So I can help you out as well. And I'm so happy to reciprocate in that way, because the truth is I don't currently have enough money to buy every book that every person would love for me to buy from them. I don't have the time either, but I sure can get the library to pick it up, and that's one step closer to being a nationally celebrated, internationally celebrated author. So what was I up to this week with the library project? So I'm still pushing really hard at Books for Brews. That event is becoming bigger and bigger as I'm getting closer, and I'm realizing all the things I need to do that I haven't been doing. What I did was I reached out to business leaders that I'm already connected to in the community to ask them their input on what I should be doing to get attention around this event. This is one of those moments where it's really tempting to put your head down and not like, plow forward, because that's one kind of putting your head down, but to put your head down and bow out, or get out of the flow that you're currently in, and kind of get on the sidelines, I guess. Nobody so far, as of right now, 8 days later, and we did have, well, no, it's 9 days, but we did have the holiday, so that could have affected things. Nobody gave clear-cut, do this kind of input, like, hey, this is what I did with my business, it worked well, or this is what I did with my business, you might consider not doing it because it's not very effective. 3 people said that they owe me a response. 2 people responded but ignored the question. Everybody else, utter silence. Haven't heard back from them. And I know in some cases when you're reaching up, people are going to be busy. There's going to be reasons why they don't reach back out to you, but that's hard. That's a hard thing to do when you know that where you're going requires you to think like people who have gotten where you're going, even if it's not in the same industry. Like, authors are not necessarily the same as car salespeople or insurance salespeople, but we have a lot to learn from industries about how to conduct ourselves in business. I've talked about this in former podcasts, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but every other business I know of understands that there are expenses that we need to take care of, and authors a lot of times feel like they're not going to have any expenses until they're selling books. It's a little bit backwards. I think the industry was trained on traditional publishing, where you got an advance. You also got a whole lot less out of the sales of your books than if you do it even through Amazon. You get a ton more than you would with the traditionally published deal. I had a moment as I was going through this where I realized what I'm actually doing is different enough in format from the people that I'm asking, that people aren't not responding because they're too busy or think that I'm too basic. I think I'm using that word correctly. What they're doing is silently admitting that they're not sure what will work. And so that led me to reflect a lot yesterday, especially. I started taking notes for the podcast really strongly yesterday. I wrote for a while on it because I wanted to keep my thinking clear about what I realized there, and that it's not all good if you're doing something brand new. Sometimes first to market with an idea gets beaten by the second to market, because the second to market can kind of sit back and watch and say, where did they fail? Where did they succeed? I will do the things that were successful, that were proven, and I'll avoid doing the things that they failed at. So kudos again to you, Rich Hosek. You've said almost that exact thing to me in a much friendlier way. And that's what this podcast is all about. The best thing I can do for you right now is not teach you the $1 million marketing mindset for novelists. Even though I believe that my mindset is right and I learned it from millionaires and billionaires, it's unproven. And so I can't teach that to you, but I can show you actively what it looks like to fight against quitting, to fight against despair, to fight against failure, to really embrace trial and error, and to not stop at conflict. I had a good conversation with a librarian this week about my books and how to get books into libraries. I've got a couple of conversations scheduled with librarians. Hopefully one's going to get back to me soon so that I can bring an interview to you that is very unique and very fun, with a woman who's been extremely successful getting genre fiction recognized in libraries more robustly. Let me try to wrap up my thoughts. I'm not as focused as I wish I would have been. But I want to wrap up my thoughts by saying that being a front runner for something like Books for Brews, I know how I want to use this. I know what I envision it's going to be. If it's a huge failure, this is a reminder to me as much as it is to you. If it's a huge failure, it doesn't mean the idea is bad. It means it needs to be trialed again so that I can get through the error to the success. At the same time, I do have one author who's going to join me for one of my events, and I think that she has some experience doing in-person events, so I'll start to lean on her a little bit more as we get closer. Her name is Margie Lucas. She was one of the first and most important influences on my writing life. In fact, before anybody else had ever said anything positive about a self-published author, she brought in a friend of hers, a guest, to our classroom in undergrad. So this would have been well over a decade ago. And it's hard to believe time has passed. But the author came in and shared with us how self-publishing could be lucrative. And I believe that she's continued to be really successful ever since. Wish I would have taken that message to heart a whole lot sooner, because things could be very different for me right now. But yeah, if you're on the fence about what to do, self-publishing is cool. Do it right, and you're just as good as anybody at FSG. Don't get defensive about it. I've met some self-published authors who really are doing everything they need to, but they still feel like they have to justify. It's hard not to, because you're told every day you're not good enough. Good grief. Trial, error, trial, success, implement. I think that's the homework for today. It's a little less practical than some I've given you in the library series so far. Trial, error, trial, success, implement. This is just a thought exercise. What have you been doing that when you fail, you quit? What have you trialed, failed, errored, and then quit? If there's something that you've trialed and errored and quit on, it might be time to resurrect it. We did a podcast episode not too long ago about the sunk cost fallacy. Try to link to that in the show notes if you want to listen, but that would be the time where there are moments when it's smart to quit. There are moments when it's really smart to walk away from something, even though your feeling tells you, like, I put so much energy into this. If I just quit, I lose all of that energy. It is true that if you quit, you lose that. But imagine how much energy you save going forward. Recognizing that something is a failure is one of the most profound ways to be a success. And you can define success any way that you want. I've recently been defining success for myself as doing what I set out to do at the level I set out to do it. Only once I have achieved the goal I had in mind, the way that I had it in mind, will I call it success. And that doesn't mean that I won't be a best-selling author and still feel like I'm not a success, because there might be elements or pieces of what I'm doing that, even though it gave me part of my goal, it didn't give me the whole of my goal. Talk to your business people too. That might be another piece of action for you, is talk to business people in your life and ask them only if they're successful. Don't ask people if they're not successful, if they haven't succeeded in their own goals. But if you have business people who are friends of yours, ask them what they did to get noticed, and the kinds of things they did to drive their business forward, because we have an asset just like they do. So there it is. That's the connection. And as a reminder, Books for Brews is ultimately so that I can build relationships with libraries. I'm able to show them. I create a community event, I bring the community to the event, and the community engages in a reading activity. Then I can take that to libraries to get acquisition. There are paid opportunities to speak and do presentations with libraries. You don't realize how much opportunity there is in a library. So if you have a format to show them that you can do what their mission is to do, which is engage the community with literature and literary media entertainment type things and knowledge and learning, if you can do that for the library and show them this is how I do it, go anywhere you want. You can have a lot of success. Don't be afraid to trial, error, trial, succeed, and implement. We'll talk to you next time.